The world of parasport is more than medals and accolades. Join hosts Greg Westlake and Travis Murao as they delve deeper and examine the important issues impacting sport. This is Beyond the Field.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Greg Westlake. Recent events around the world have put a renewed focus on ensuring that people of diverse backgrounds are welcome and have a voice in all areas of life, the parasport world included. Later in the show, Travis catches up with wheelchair basketball legend Richard Peter to talk about his experience. But first, we're joined by Kieran Block. Kieran played in the Western Hockey League before his injury and transition to para ice hockey, where he made Team Canada. Kieran, thanks so much for being here today. We were teammates on Team Canada for such a long time, but we never talked about the topic of racial diversity and what you went through as a hockey player. So I can't wait to have this conversation.
It is a big topic right now, and it's cool to get the opportunity to talk about it, because sometimes I forget that it does impact me as much as it does, and I sometimes just brush it off. So yeah, awesome.
One thing I love about your story is that you competed at such a high level of stand-up hockey and then made the transition to para ice hockey. With that unique perspective, I'm just curious if you feel like athletes from marginalized communities face the same issues in the parasport world as they do in a larger sport community.
Yes and no. Like the politics, for sure, they do play a part in both worlds. Just like in anything, it's such a relationship game, who you know, sort of who you're connected to. But one thing I found that I thought was pretty cool in the sledge hockey realm, I mean, still there's very few ethnic minorities in sledge hockey, but I found it to be very open and accepting of just all people, just because of the wide range of abilities and disabilities that people had. It sort of was already a smaller community, and it lent itself well to just adapt and adopt whoever wanted to participate in the sport. So I found that when I went into the sledge hockey world, I saw just different people with different abilities, ranging from intellectual abilities to physical limitations, and everyone was just sort of smiling, and it just felt like a warm community. I didn't feel like I was targeted as much, and if I was, it was more of my ability that I was so able-bodied versus my ethnic minority basis of my skin color.
I'm glad to hear that. I really am. And one thing I've never asked you, but I'm very interested to hear your answer, is as you progressed from the grassroots level into the Paralympic level, what was it like joining a team as the first and only Black player on Team Canada?
No, and you know what? Like when I discovered that just recently, actually, I thought like, wow, like I think it's so cool that I got an opportunity to be the first. I never really thought about it when I was working my way up. I mean, just walking in the Team Canada dressing room before my first game, it was like, I'm putting on the jersey. And I saw so many of my friends in the stand-up world get an opportunity to do that, and it was pretty cool. And I was very excited and honored for my first, my first time to be able to put the jersey on. So I focused more on that. But when I actually did sit back and realize that there wasn't too many Black players, Asian players, East Indian players, even in the world, it kind of struck me when we would play in a team like Norway and their backup goalie would be Black, and it's like you almost get that special nod to that guy as we walk by, because it was me and him.
Yeah, and with so little diversity, it's important for athletes and organizations to be allies. So I'm curious, what should people do when athletes face racism?
I think you can acknowledge it. I think we get afraid to acknowledge it at times. I know in one of my last games against Swift Current, there's a player that called me a racial slur in the game, and I mean, I kind of snapped. I lost it, and and the ref literally just said, I heard it, and it like de-escalated me completely. In the heat of the moment of hockey and the frustration and the emotion that was behind it, I was at a stage where it wasn't comfortable for me. And I got an apology from their hockey team, from the organization, just taking some ownership and just acknowledging what was said, acknowledging that that's not your beliefs, and I think that goes a long way, at least for me. So just acknowledging it, I think, is really important on that front.
It sucks that you had to experience that, but I'm glad you felt supported. I really am. Did you ever feel that same overt racism in the parasport world?
I haven't really faced it from the players, and I think just because of what we talked about being disabled, just connecting on that human level, it's like guys might not have liked me, but it wasn't because I was black. It was because I would pick them as I skated by in a delicate way so that nobody knew, and then I would turn and smile at them with like a cheeky smile. The only impacts that I wouldn't really, I say this lightly and delicately, again, just that coaching perspective. I had really a lot of struggles in my career, from just not classifying to getting cut from teams when honestly, like in my opinion, which whatever it is, what it is, I'm pretty biased on it. I don't think I should have been cut, and I do wonder. I do wonder if my coach was black in sledge hockey, would that have changed things? Because it's hard when you have a white coach, white manager, white assistant coaches, and then it's like, not only am I'm black, but I'm also disabled, and I'm also the first. So it's like I do wonder, would my coaches have been more tolerant of me, more accepting of me? Would I have related better to my coaches if they were black, or they were at least some kind of ethnic minority? And I have thought about that, because I didn't have anyone, and that goes, I say it delicately, but it's like that goes all the way up in Hockey Canada. Where's my representation in Hockey Canada? Who in Hockey Canada isn't white? I couldn't tell you, any coach that I've ever seen that's not white in Hockey Canada. So I think it is a big systemic issue, honestly, and I think it'd be great at this stage of the game. There's enough black players out there. There's enough black people out there. Because even as I coached, it was like I wasn't even considered as a coach for the sledge hockey team when I was just purely coaching as a 3-time national champion associate coach. I wasn't even considered to be brought in ever within the sledge hockey team. And why is that? So yeah, I guess that representation in Hockey Canada would be nice.
It makes sense. You bring up a great point about representation and why it's important for players to feel like they're in a safe and heard environment. Kieran, this is a topic that I wish we touched on so long ago. You gave us so much to think about. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. And I think this is great, Greg. Like the more conversations like this we can have, I think the better, because it does just raise that awareness, and you talk about it, it normalizes those experiences, and then you can look to share a lot more later on. So thanks again for having me on.
More to come on Beyond the Field. You're watching Beyond the Field.
Welcome back. I'm Travis Murao. In our first interview, Kieran Block raised some interesting points while discussing his experience as the first and only black athlete on Canada's para ice hockey team. And I'm interested in furthering the conversation on diversity with Richard Peter. Richard, or Bear to teammates and friends, is a 5-time Paralympian and 3-time gold medalist in wheelchair basketball. He's also a proud member of the Cowichan tribes. Richard, it's great to have you.
Travis, yeah, good to see you.
Let's start at the beginning. How did you get involved with parasports?
I got injured, at a young age. Grew up on Vancouver Island, city of Duncan, from Cowichan tribes, and growing up as a kid, I was one of the only kids with a disability, and so I just played and had a lot of fun with my friends. So I didn't play any parasports until I was probably, I'll say like 15-ish. I was a teenager, and wheelchair basketball demo team came to my school. And that was the first time I'd ever seen any parasport. So actually at that time, I didn't want to participate. I was like, no, I don't need to play any wheelchair basketball. I'm having fun playing sports with my family and friends and hanging out. But I'm very, very glad that I did get out there and give it a try.
Now, growing up, you didn't have any access to parasports within your community. Would you say that's the norm for remote Aboriginal communities?
It's hard to say if that's the norm, because it's really any small town. Unfortunately for parasports, there's a lot in the major cities. And so once you get into the rural communities, then that's much harder. And so that's the big thing that once, well, especially for me too, that once I got injured, I went back to my home community and didn't get as much information about parasports and also SCI, spinal cord injury information. So that was, a bit of a challenge and a big learning curve for me and my family.
I bet. Now, at the age of 19, you moved to Vancouver to take the next step in your wheelchair basketball career. What was that like?
First, I was very excited. That probably really sparked my love of travel and meeting new people, new cultures, and so I've really enjoyed that all my sporting career and life. But yes, anytime you're a new kid on the block, you always get a bit of whether it's teasing, but then also, yes, racism. I mean, I think one of my first major tournaments, probably in Vancouver, I came over and received quite a bit of flack, but as a young kid, it was pretty hard on me. And so I went back home and I always chatted with my grandparents, and I was sitting in my grandfather's garden. He passed away many years ago, but I sat there and he noticed that I was a little bit down. And so I was chatting with him and we talked about it. And the bottom line was that he said, all right, well, Richard, what do you want to do? I said, I think I'm going to quit this sport. I don't think it's really good for me receiving too much flack, and he really instilled some great words into me and said, well, he said he supports me and says, yes, I'll support any decision you make, but do I love sports? Do I love playing wheelchair basketball? And I said, yes, I do love that. And he's like, all right, well, don't allow that person to take that away from you. If you still love what you're going to do, then, continue on with that. And that's what really, helped me. Because I won't say that was the only one time. There was a few times, and so that always helped me to, to enjoy the sport. And that's what I try to instill with anybody that I meet now too. I'm like, all right, if you really enjoy the sport and activity, then don't let anything, take that away from you. Try to do as much as you can to stick with it and enjoy it, and hopefully the better things will overcome the negative effects.
Wow, what an amazing story. Your grandfather really stepped in at a pivotal moment in your life with some sage advice. So, do you think that Inuit and First Nations athletes still face some of the same barriers and racism that you faced when they're entering the parasport world?
Unfortunately, you can pick any sport, there still is a lot of racism. I mean, with Black Lives Matter, that's opening up a lot of different stories that are coming up out of the woodworks, and so they've always been there with all different cultures, and that's one of the big things that are happening all over the world. And a lot of people do say, oh, it's great, Richard, it's great that you represent Canada and live in Canada. It must be a great country to live in. And I'm like, yes, it is. But as a minority, there still is a lot of racism in all different communities. Might be harder to see in a large city, let's say it's Vancouver or Toronto, but then once you get into the smaller communities, then you do see a lot of issues that are happening there. So let's say whenever I work with either at GF Strong or with wheelchair sports or wheelchair basketball, then that's one of the big things that I always try to do too, that if we do have a new athlete that comes in, to try to make them feel as safe, and try to get out there and feel, as secure as possible, that there's hopefully no issues that will arise here, and just that it's a safe space that they can come out and just enjoy the sport. Because that's what I always try to say, is that if you don't enjoy your first interaction with the sport, whether it's recreational or high level, then you might not continue with it. So I try to make sure that you have at least an enjoyable time and continue on and have a good time.
Yeah, I think that first experience is just so important. I know that when I started playing wheelchair rugby, having another Asian teammate on the team really helped me kind of feel included, just because it was such a white-dominated sport. Now, do you feel parasports has a diversity problem?
Unfortunately, as I talked about earlier too, that, it's, many other athletes around the world that say, oh, it must be great to live in Canada. And I say, all right, yes, it is, but there still are issues. And I've had that in my career, and I know that still does happen. Throughout my whole career on the wheelchair basketball team for 5 Paralympics and close to 20 years, that I was one of the only, I was the only Indigenous athlete on the national team. There were a few that came out and tried here and there, and so we supported one another, but it is tough being the only Indigenous athlete at times. And And it's not just the Indigenous community, all minorities are at a bit of a going uphill, whereas some other athletes might be having on a flat playing field. And so there's definitely a lot of different barriers. And so it's a continuous battle with all athletes. And like I was saying, that's again where I try to just be as supportive I can and just try to help out to make that sport, our activity, as enjoyable as possible. And I'd say a lot of things that happened to me in my past have helped me become the guy who I am here today. And I guess that's why you guys called.
That's exactly it. Richard, it's been great talking to you. And you know what? I just want to thank you for taking the time to be such a great role model for me when I was a young athlete starting parasports. You made a big difference in my life.
Well, thank you very much, Travis and AMI, for having me on here today. It's been a joy, and it's great just to share any kind of stories. Thanks again.
Stay tuned for more Beyond the Field. This is Beyond the Field.
Welcome back. I'm Greg Westlake, and as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Travis Murao. Travis, today we are talking diversity in parasport, and I'm curious, from your personal experience, have you ever faced any racism or discrimination in your sport career?
Well, Greg, I gotta say that when I heard Kieran's interview, I really found a lot of parallels to my own sporting journey where, at first playing hockey, football, and baseball growing up, I experienced a lot of racism and I encountered a lot of it. But once I entered parasports, I found the environment to be a lot more welcoming and inclusive. And a lot of it has to do with just the parasport world and how they're really inclusive and they're welcoming of all athletes. And it really helped to have an athlete like Richard Peter in my area where, a guy like Richard Peter casts such a large shadow where, if there's any racism or intolerance in that community, I mean, you're gonna have to deal with Bear. And I think that it went a huge way to making that environment a healthy one for me when I started sport, because once I started playing internationally, I realized that that wasn't the case for all athletes out there.
Well, it's so great to have that support. You referenced Kieran's interview, and I never realized that he might have had those moments where he felt alone and didn't have an ally. And, looking back, I wish I could have supported better. What advice would you give to somebody who maybe doesn't have a Bear?
Man, that's a tough question, because I think to have another ally is so huge, especially when Kieran talked about the acknowledgement piece of how that made the situation better. So I would say just using your teammates to rally around you and letting them know that acknowledgement matters to you. And when you do encounter racism, if you can come together as a team and they can all acknowledge it, it really goes a long way to helping things out. And I gotta ask you, Greg, as a white athlete, were you surprised to hear any of these stories of discrimination?
100%. One thing that really opened my eyes was just realizing how different two experiences can be. If you take Kieran's experience on Team Canada and my own experience on Team Canada, in my eyes, I thought we were having a similar experience. And it turns out that we weren't at all, because he never felt represented. He never felt like there was a staff member that he could relate to. We never had a black coach. We have never had a black coach. And so some of those coaching decisions, when he doesn't get ice time or taken to a tournament, he questions the validity of that decision. I never even thought about that, because I always just thought they were always just hockey-based decisions. That thought would never cross my mind. So that's the biggest thing for me, is just how different two similar experiences can be. And so I think it really opened my eyes to having a 360-degree view of all situations and what other people might be thinking about. The other thing that I think about is just the travel part of it. And I'd love to know your experiences once you get outside of Canada, or even outside of a province or your community. Does that change things on the racial scale?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because, man, I really noticed it once you start traveling internationally. Different countries have different accepted standards in their societies, and it can be a little jarring at first, but that's where that team component and acknowledgement really comes into play, where, I've had some experiences on the road that could have made me feel really isolated and really alone out there, but my team really came together and we all had a good laugh, and people acknowledged like, oh, that situation was really messed up, and it became something that really brought us together rather than made me feel alone. So I'm really thankful for that piece.
Well, and the other thing that kind of makes me proud to be a Paralympian is hearing these stories of how in the parasport world, it's actually a bit more accepting, and there's a connection on a deeper level of having a disability and helping somebody day to day. And you mentioned that you touched on that a little bit, but could you expand on that?
Yeah, I think in the parasport world, there's a great attitude towards people who are different, or maybe people who look different, where in parasports, we're so used to all ranges of disabilities that when we see somebody who's different, we say, oh, you're different, that's cool. Like, it's seen as something special and something that's valuable. And I think that's really cool. I mean, how about you, Greg? Have you had that same experience in parasport? Do you find it a more welcoming environment? Do you think it is?
Yeah, I definitely do. And it's, like I said, it's something that I'm very proud of. Very proud to be a Paralympian and be in a community that accepts everybody, that just wants everybody to be their truest, best self, you know, generally speaking. I know that there's been some tough experiences out there, and again, I'm not qualified to even touch this topic. So I like to think that we're very inclusive. I know for myself, I've really learned through these interviews and these chats that it's not enough just to think you're inclusive. You have to actually speak it. You have to actually put actions to words. And so that's one thing I'm definitely taking away from this.
That is something to think about, but unfortunately we have to end the conversation there. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, if you want to watch more Beyond the Field, check us out at ami.ca or on the AMI app.
Hosts Travis Murao, Greg Westlake, producer Ted Cooper, associate producer Alex Smythe, editors Manuel Grados Andrade, Matthew McGurk, integrated described video specialist Ron Rickford, audio post Mike Monson, graphics Mike Smith, senior producer Michelle Dudas, president and CEO David Arrington, copyright 2021, Accessible Media Inc.